college matters. It can lead to higher income and lower unemployment. But tuition costs are rising. And so knowledge of financial aid and 529 plans is essential to making college more affordable. And here to talk with me about that is Tricia Scarlata. She's the head of education planning at JP Morgan Asset Management. Tricia, welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to start not with that so much, but with recent news. Right now, wending its way through the House of Representatives is something called the Student Success and Taxpayer Savings Plan. There are two elements to it, one called the Repayment Assistance Plan, and then there are some borrowing limits that are being proposed. Not law yet, but can you provide any insight onto this?
Sure. I mean, look, this administration said they were going to try to tackle financial aid, and so they are trying to tackle it. They are simplifying it. This particular proposal is simplification. So, what does that mean? That means that some of the flexibility that was there before would go away.
Yeah. So that would be like SAVE and IBRs and public loan forgiveness?
That's correct. Yeah.
That would affect my children.
And I think what they're also trying to do is they're trying to eliminate this ongoing debt, that the debt keeps going on and on. I think that's what the goal is. Some say the goal is to, help the deficit. And some say the goal is to make people more aware of exactly what they're getting into and really, hopefully, maybe trying to get these institutions to look at what they pay. Because, it's like anything else. The institution gets more expensive, people take out more loans. Who knows what's going to happen? These things evolve. We saw it time and time again with forgiveness. I'm not sure that this is going to pass, but we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it.
Right. I mean, just on the topic of debt, for those who go into it aware of the cost and the benefit of going to maybe a school where you incur that debt, is that problematic per se on the face of it?
I think I think the standard or the school of thought, right, is that you really shouldn't take out more debt than you expect to earn in year one.
Yeah.
So if you think you're going to earn $50,000 or $60,000 in your first year, you really shouldn't be taking out more debt than that. Because if you start to look at the percentage, so you don't want to really go higher than 10 to 15% of your gross income, right? Because that payment starts to get hefty. You're talking $500, $600, $700 a month.
Yeah.
You're just getting out of school. That's a lot of money.
Right. And so that decision has to be made when you're a senior in high school before you commit?
I think you got to be really starting to have that conversation a lot earlier, Bob. I think, we just talked about there's so many options. You don't have to go to the most expensive school. I mean, state schools are a fraction of these private schools. Or, in our College Planning Essentials Guide, one page that we have in there is the community college option. So you could reduce your total cost by almost half if you went to a community college for the first 2 years and then the last 2 years go to wherever and have that experience. Look, these conversations need to happen really early on because it's very hard for parents, and we know this, to say no. Yeah. And that's when we get in trouble.
It's hard. But I can tell you firsthand, we have a cousin who went to a community college for 2 years and then went to Columbia for 2 years. And it worked out perfectly fine there. Right?
No one knows about that community school for the most part. Certainly when you do a job application, you have to say the schools you went to. But at the end of the day, you're writing on that resume, Columbia. I graduated from Columbia. Yeah. So it's where you got that diploma.
Yeah. So the other thing, when we have 4 children in my case, triplet boys, and we had hired a consultant who ultimately said to us, you want to apply to schools where you'll be in the upper quartile of incoming freshmen based on your standardized scores and your GPA.
Absolutely.
That's where the most merit aid
you
is.
Bet.
Not enough people know that.
No, and I do talk to families about that quite often because if you look at what the average family got last year in aid, it's about $12,000. Not a ton. But the most money you can get, and that's averages, and we know how averages work, right? But the most dollars you really can get are those merit dollars. And so, yes, if you have a child who, if you have a Yale student, someone who could go to Yale, wonderful. If that student applied to somewhere like Providence College, let's use that as an example, Providence is going to give that kid a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage families to not just apply to a school that you think your kid's going to get into and schools that are a reach, but also apply to those schools. Same, if you're applying private, also apply to a private school that you know is a guarantee get in because you can use that to help leverage and get potentially more money from some of the other institutions. But then you can make an educated decision. Hey, Bob, you're getting $30,000 from here, you're getting nothing from here. So do you want to take on, $50,000 of debt, or do you want to take on 10? It's an educated decision.
Yeah. It's interesting. In a number of books that I've read, either they talk about it as paying either wholesale or retail or fully funded versus full price.
Exactly. I mean, and again, it's really knowing what that number is going to be. And I encourage families to not only know the cost, so know what that number is. My son went to Fordham. I think Fordham's $92,000 now. Thankfully, I do not pay $92,000. But then look at what could you potentially get in aid. So will your child get merit? My son got merit from Fordham, so got a very nice scholarship. Again, Fordham was not a reach for him. It was, a target school, so he got that money. And knowing that number is how you can begin to plan. Yeah. And so most people just kind of don't do that extra research. And a good way to look at it is just go to the institution and go to their net cost calculator. So if you went in and Googled Fordham University net cost calculator, you would be able to, you'd get right to their net cost calculator, and you could quickly find out what that institution will cost for you based on a couple inputs.
Yeah. A lot of folks use Naviance, I think.
Yes, Naviance
as a way
is great.
To sort of determine
Absolutely.
And you highly recommend that people
I
use
do,
it?
because you can also see in your child's school, their high school, where were people previously that got in? And ask that question at your high school. I remember, I wanted my son to go to Villanova. And I remember he would never have gotten in unless he ED'd. So you call that guidance counselor and you ask that guidance counselor last year, what did the ED students that got in, what were their stats? And they can tell you that. They can't tell you the student's name, but they'll say, one kid was a 92 GPA with a 1400. Another kid was a 90, whatever those stats are. You can find that out, and you can also get it on Naviance.
Yeah.
Look, you got to figure out a way to make yourself stand out. It's just like in a job. So if you're applying to a competitive school, and your child's in high school, how can they stand out? There's so many athletes. There's so many kids with good grades.
So many kids with service records
exactly.
going to Costa Rica.
Exactly.
Right.
It's tough. It's tough. But we both know as parents, they always wind up where they should be.
Where they should be, and if they make the most of it, it doesn't really matter where you go.
Absolutely. That is 100% correct.
Yeah, it all depends on where you go.
You bet.
The other thing that I think sometimes gets lost in the discussion is that people can appeal the aid that they're getting and maybe don't do that often enough. I have an anecdote where a friend of mine, his daughter got into UConn and Syracuse.
Yep.
Syracuse didn't offer a lot of money, so UConn seemed like the more affordable choice. Then they appealed, not once but twice, and made it as affordable as UConn.
Appeal. I did the same thing, and it does work. Look, there's going to be a point where they're going to say no. That's it.
Right.
But this is where you use leverage. I remember encouraging my son to apply to another private school that was, a tier down. Again, just as I mentioned before. So let's use that as leverage, because you can't use a private institution and a public institution. So you can't say my kid got into Binghamton and Binghamton's only going to be 25, and Fordham, I want you to be 25. They'll say that's not apples to apples. But you should absolutely appeal. What you want to do is for financial aid, true aid, you want to go to the financial aid office. If it's merit dollars, you want to go through admissions. And don't just send an email, hey, I need more money. We all need more money.
Yeah.
Tell them what you specifically are looking for and be realistic. If you go in and say, I need another $30,000 and they've given you $25,000, it's not happening. Be realistic and go down the right pathways.
Yeah,
to the right folks.
This is really helpful. I have to say it spans the gamut. My daughter ended up going to the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Nice.
And you would say we live in Massachusetts. There's no way that she's going to get any sort of aid at all. But lo and behold, they have an alumni association that gives out grants and whatnot to undergrads.
Smart.
And it was a surprise because otherwise my daughter would have ended up at not a bad choice, UMass Amherst.
Oh, another good school, but yeah.
But it made UW-Madison as affordable as UMass Amherst.
So interesting. And I tell families all the time, Bob, leverage go to your guidance office. There's a lot of community-based scholarships that kids can be applying for. Some of it's just essays. Yeah, it takes a little bit of work.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of work.
Talk about essays. So my wife does some coaching on essays, and in one case, a student that she worked with went to University of Rochester, and in her a letter of acceptance, they actually mentioned
Really?
the essay, which is
I
the first
love
time,
that.
right? So somehow, some way, someone actually read the essay and it resonated.
We work very closely with a couple different private counseling firms that counsel families on how to get into whatever the college of their dream is. And sometimes we'll go and present on how to get in, well, how to afford it, how to save and invest for it, but then also how to get in, right? And so they tell us that they read these essays, and that could be the deciding factor.
The difference.
I would take them very seriously. I really would.
So when you think about helping kids with essays, does it matter that they get some help aside from their guidance counselor, that they go to outside help? Or
Look, I think you need not. Look, I think a
put you on
lot
the
of kids
spot
get help. I will tell you, I sent my son's essay to forward him around to not professionals, but to colleagues, to friends. Just take a look at it. I think that's okay. But I think, look, the story needs to be realistic. They're no dummies. They know when somebody else is actually writing this. And I think the more
or if AI
authentic,
is writing it.
exactly. Well, today that wasn't even an issue when he applied so much. But I think the more authentic you can be, it's not that it has to be this far-fetching idea. You just need to be authentic in it.
Yeah.
And tie in something about that institution. Why is that institution the place for you in your story?
Yeah.
So I remember with him specifically, he used sort of the theme of the school, and I can't even remember what it was, but he tied that into the story that he was telling. And I think it was quite effective. I hope it was. I guess it was.
Yeah.
But I really do instruct people to make sure they're somehow tying into what they want to do eventually. So somebody may be talking about, I know somebody that's child talked about learning to ski and doing sort of the your French fries and pizza.
Uh-huh.
And this particular child was applying for engineering. And so tying that into engineering, sort of that thought around process. How do you learn? Being process-oriented and achieving your goals. So think about that. How can you relate that essay back to what your degree is and what that institution provides?
Yeah. I could talk about essays for
I know,
a
me
long
too. Me
time.
too.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I'll ask you all these questions,
Awesome.
Tricia. Don't go away. Welcome back to Decoding Retirement. Hi, I'm talking to Tricia Scarlata. She's the head of education planning at JP Morgan Asset Management. Tricia, we spent the whole first half talking about things that aren't even on my cheat sheet here.
Listen, getting in is important.
But I want to talk about the thing that I think troubles most parents when they think about saving for retirement and saving for their children's college education at the same time, which is to say two competing demands on your money and finite resources.
Absolutely. I know, my colleague, Mike Conrath, talks about very similarly, knowing that number, right? So your retirement number, what's your retirement number? So what do you need to get to and how do you get there? But it's kind of the same with college. So knowing what that number is, and the number is going to be different for everybody because obviously schools costs are different, but also not everybody's looking to pay for 100%. So one family might only be able to pay for 50 or 25%. Another family is at 100%. So understand what that number is and not today's number, because you and I both know that tuition goes up 5 to 6% every year. So look at not where today's number is, but when your child goes, what that cost is going to be per year, and then obviously you want to multiply it by 4, and then think about what part of that you want to cover. Is it 100%? Is it 50%? But also, really be realistic about aid. Be very realistic about what you think you're going to get. I mean, I tell families all the time, go to studentaid.gov and do the simulator. There's an estimator on there. You can calculate what you may get as of today, and know what that net number is. Look, families are doing a really good job saving. They are putting money away, but they're not necessarily planning and investing for college, which they are doing for retirement.
Right.
With college, they're not taking that next step. And, my goal is to always talk about how if you're not investing and you're not potentially leveraging a 529 account, you're missing out on that tax-free growth and compounding over time, and that ability to take that money out for qualified distributions or withdrawals tax-free.
Yeah.
And cash is just not going to get you there. And so, investing and leveraging that tax-free benefit is really what we try to encourage people to do.
You know, it's interesting. We had Olivia Mitchell on from Wharton a
Yep.
little bit ago, and then she had just published a paper on 529 plans, and that the lack of knowledge that people had around 529 plans and choosing the wrong one
Yeah.
made a big difference in how the outcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you just look at the two accounts side by side, a taxable and a non-taxable account, all things being equal, you make a $10,000 contribution up front, and then you subsequently put in $500 a month. At the end of 18 years, you have almost $42,000 more in the tax-free account. That's a big amount. That's almost 2 years of a public institution.
Yep.
And so we've got to spread that word. And 529 plans are very accessible. Some of them are $15 to get started. And you have to think, I think people get discouraged because it's so expensive and they just feel like, I'm not going to do anything. And I'm not going to take that next step. I encourage people to take the next step, leverage those benefits, because every dollar you put away today is less in debt in the future.
Yeah. It's a great report. But one of the things that's mentioned in there is that 55% of families are delaying retirement by 5 years to pay for college costs. And, I know there's been research that says, it's worth delaying retirement by 2 years to make up for inadequate savings. But 5 years?
5 years is a long time. I mean, if you think about it, 65 to 70, 70 to 75, those are meaningful years as we get older. And I know I'm getting closer to that age. And so, look, it's a family decision. It's a family decision. And what we have found is that parents do not jeopardize their college savings fund. They almost never take those dollars out early. They wait till that child goes to college and then they withdraw. What we do find is a lot of them are borrowing against their retirement to pay those tuition bills. And that's where I always get concerned, because when you start to borrow against your retirement or your 401k, what we see is that most people then don't contribute. And so a lot of times they're missing out on that company's match, and that's free money. So you want to at least be doing up to that and getting that, that company match. Yeah. And to borrow against it, isn't always, and look, we talk about in the guide, for every $10,000 you borrow, it wounds up being $32,000 less.
Yeah. These parents are also taking out Parent Plus loans and retiring with those loans.
And look, those loans, the interest rates are high. You're looking over 9% for some of those. So yes, they are. I mean, last year, the average family graduated with about $55,000 in debt. The parents were, closer to 30. The kid was about 25. So, pretty split between the two. That's a lot of money to take on as you're inching towards retirement. And that's the age. Yeah. I mean, I have a child that's graduating this next weekend, and, hopefully I'm getting closer to retirement. Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing that's new and different is, I think it was Secure Act 2.0, where we had the ability to convert your 529 to a Roth IRA. Now, there are all kinds of restrictions around
Of course.
But maybe talk about the opportunity that exists there.
Sure. The one thing that this Roth IRA rollover has done is, I think, opened more people's eyes to 529 plans, because for whatever reason, people think I'm so restricted. If I go into a 529 plan, my child doesn't go to school, I'm stuck. And so this has kind of given folks a little bit of a comfort that I could always then roll it over to a Roth IRA. So let's talk about it. So the max amount that can be rolled over in a lifetime is $35,000, right? So it's $35,000. The account has to be open for 15 years, right? So they're not letting you open this account and roll over. Okay, so it has to be established for 15 years. The beneficiary is when you're rolling over, that has to be the same beneficiary. So the Roth IRA has to be in. So if you were my beneficiary, your Roth IRA would be yours, not mine. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing to think about is you can't just roll over $35,000, right? So the max you can put into the IRA this year is $7. Yep. So if we use this year as an example, it would take you 5 years, right, to roll that over. But what a blessing,
right?
I mean, so there are some stipulations around it, but we have another page in the guide that just shows, if you're able to do that $35,000 over 5 years, and starting when the child is but the adult is 23, at 65, it's almost $400,000.
Yeah.
What a blessing.
Yeah.
What a blessing.
I mean, otherwise the money would stay in the 529 plan and would have to either be given to next of kin
Absolutely.
or, I mean, there are
Change
restrictions on who can.
beneficiaries. You
Right.
can make yourself the beneficiary. So there's a lot of flexibility, but now you also have the ability to do that rollover.
Yeah.
And we are getting a lot of questions. I actually just got a question yesterday from an advisor just wanting to reach out to clients because they're, all his clients whose children are graduating, letting them know, hey, they have excess in their account. You can roll it over now. So it's a tremendous benefit.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of time left, Tricia, and I'm curious. We've talked a lot about college. There are some high school students who won't go to college this year or perhaps ever. What advice do you have for them in terms of the skills and knowledge and abilities that they have to sort of enter the workforce and get income and not be unemployed?
Yeah, I mean, I go to Fordham a lot and talk to the students there, which I love, and they have the greatest questions, and it's so raw and real. I think a college degree matters. I really believe that it matters. And it's $40,000 of more income versus, a high school graduate versus a college graduate. So if you think about that $40,000 and you think about what the average family had in debt coming out of college, it's not that much more than that difference in income. So it's what, 15, we said 55,000 was the average family graduated with last year, the debt, but you're earning $40,000 more with that degree. That's pretty powerful. So I still believe that a college degree is very important. And I think, look, today, these kids have the world is the limit, much more so than you and I. We were told.
If I knew AI.
Yeah. But we were told, get a degree and go into a profession, and that's what you have to do, be a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever you and I are. These kids have so many options. But I still believe you need that degree. I'm a firm believer in the degree. Look, you mentioned earlier the unemployment rates are half for those who have a degree versus those who do not. Yeah. So when times get tough, you're better off having that degree.
Yeah, and your human capital, right? Your lifetime earnings will be all the greater, right? Not just the.
And look, I have a child who I mentioned to you earlier. I never thought he'd go to college, and now he's a tremendous musician, and he's going for music. I don't know that my parents would have sent me for music, but there's so many degrees today. I mean, there are so many different things out there. Like I said, the sky's the limit for these kids. The education is really important.
Yeah. Tricia, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but and there's lots more in the CPE that we didn't get
yes,
to.
College Planning Essentials.
We'll have
you
come back on and share more
to.
knowledge and wisdom about that in the future, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right, that wraps up this edition of Decoding Retirement. We're glad you joined us, and we hope that we provided you with some actionable advice to help you plan for or live in retirement. And you can listen to or watch us on all your favorite podcast platforms. And if you've got questions about retirement, email us at yfpodcasts@yahooinc.com.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.